Let me present them. I am Albert Roca. I am anthropologist and researcher on Africa in the University of Lleida, and have been in several universities, mainly in the University of Barcelona, where all my working group is based. But I am from Lleida, so I prefer to live in Lleida. And then I have proposed this panel with Professor Taibo and with Professor David Miller. And I'm going to present the panel, but this is a common enterprise. I want to excuse Professor Miller because he won't be able to attend the panel because of health reasons, but he's following all the process, and he has presented 2 papers with 2 other persons that we are going to process after the. So let me just present a bit the panel. May I share as you see, my English is rather an Spanish English, and my PowerPoint is also a bit adaptive. So it's a very easy PowerPoint, but maybe it can help you to follow me. The idea of the panel is speaking about the being or not being of local knowledge in formal institutions. And when we speak about formal education institutions or formal training institutions, we speak mainly about universities. Then I wanted to say some things about this local knowledge and about decolonization, because it's the leitmotif of the Congress, Decolonize Minds. I want to say some things about this. The first thing is that we feel that local knowledge is necessary for African populations, for African future, and in fact, even for global future. So we are not going to discuss about if it's necessary or not. Some of us will argue why it's necessary, but we are not going to discuss it. We are going to discuss how to integrate or how to articulate it. But in the common discussion, we can go back to this point. This is the first assumption. Then there is another one. I have never liked the word decolonization. I don't use it in my teaching and not in my research. Why? Because it has some connotations I don't like. The first one is that when you speak about decolonization as the political process before Second World War, there is some connotation of African passivity. So colonizers do and colonizers undo. That's why I don't use it. I speak about emancipation. And then because it gives too much importance to colony, because colony has been very brief and very shallow. So the consequence of this are that many of us think that African minds are scarcely colonized. Really far less than Europoid or Western minds that continue to see world under the colonial vision, sometimes under the world global. It's just a colonial vision. By the contrary, African modern institutions, from the state to any other one, but especially in this case, universities, are effectively colonized and are in a structure universalist. But that means that African societies remain epistemologically plural. So this is a bit the situation where the panel situates. Then there is a big challenge. The big challenge is the level, the degree of difference between knowledge systems, not between individuals. That's important thing. That's not the Esker like term that you see one thing from a perspective or another, just making an effort of mind. It's not an effort of mind is not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. You need also a kind of collective approach. And I will go back to some of these questions. Sorry. Then, which is the problem? This is the challenge, but which is the problem? The problem is that this situation is not a casual situation. It's not something where different knowledge systems just live together. The globalization is applied as coercion against diversity. And we may discuss this because this is a question of discussing, but I think everybody who works on local knowledge feels this. So words that are interesting and good in itself as scientific community, human rights, even others that are not so consensual, like World Trade Organization or World Health Organization, have their own, I would say, dark side, in the sense that they don't facilitate diversity. In fact, there is a co-option of validators of knowledge. And this co-option means that people that are local knowledge usually left outside of validators. And that means that we have a big problem to integrate local knowledge in universities. And we are going to see different phases of this problem. Solutions. Well, it's clear I have no solutions. If I would have solutions, I would be probably a politician, or I don't know, entrepreneur. I don't know, but I think we may signal some ways, not receipts, but ways. So the first thing is that I think we don't need to decolonize African minds, but we need to decolonize decision-maker structures that affects also African people. So there are African peoples in these structures. And I see the only word that I see, and I think that's very general in all the papers we have and all the conversation we have, the main thing is to increase participation, real participation, and increase autonomy, real empowerment then, but of the different, not of the same. And understanding that we have very different world visions and very different values and very different potential. So that means to put uses over principles, put pact over dialogue. So that means what in science we call an empirical-based approach. And we are going to go. That's why we would like to speak about some cases. Then this type of solution, this try to make participation possible. I think there are two big poles of essays, of experience that has been done. One is what I call accredited pluralism. That means some kind of university of homologation of local knowledge-specific training institutions. Professor Miller presents one of these models. It means prepare institutions of same level than universities that teaches or explains local knowledge. There are many examples. I have put some of them that are not of training, but that goes with this same idea. I remember with Tandem, even when I read Cheikh Anta Diop, the professor Cheikh Anta Diop, proposal in his small book about federalism in Africa, about two cameras in Africa, one for men and one for women. It was really a big proposal, because they say, okay, if they are together, maybe they are going to lose their potential and in fact try to dominate the other. But separated by the moment and then put together, that would be better. This kind of approach is a bit accredited pluralism. The other one is just spontaneous pluralism, what you find now. It means that there is an acceptation or a tolerated juridical pluralism autonomy. The problem of this one is that when arbitrage is needed or where finance is needed, then the local knowledge has the losing part. So between those two poles, there are many possible combinations and trials. So what to do in Orthodox university centers? I think this panel wants to become a forum. It's a panel in this moment. It will be a panel during 2 hours, but we'd like to transform it in a forum after this day, just to put together experiences, because what we need is to put together experiences, to put together efforts, and especially people. And then to contrast, we have, each one has its own baggage of experiences. I have those two there, CUDA and FISIAfrica I have participated in them, but there are many more. And we are going to prepare a continuity of the panel with a common publication and also some activities proposed by the members of the panel. No, but things are done by doing them. So I propose you to open the panel. I welcome everybody, and I welcome everybody participation. And now I will give the word to one of the panelists, Marijn Prakker, that is going to make the moderation, is going to be the chairman of the session, and going to explain also the structure. So welcome.
Okay, welcome everybody. First, let me, can you stop sharing your screen? Welcome everybody to this panel. I will put up the planning of the afternoon for the moment. There's two things, or three things actually, I want to say before we start. So, but one of the things Professor Roca already did, that Professor Miller is one of the conveners, but he cannot be here. But we are, of course, thinking about him at this moment. Second is that I want to introduce the person that is reporting this panel for the entire conference, which is Tikam Sal. Maybe she can put on her camera for a moment and wave. Yeah, okay. Are you in Dakar right now, or are you in the Netherlands?
I am in Senegal, not in Dakar.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you that you're here, and she will registrate everything for the conference. And then the last thing is that tonight at, I believe, 8, there will be shown a film also through one of these links, which the conference asked me to raise your attention for. It's beautiful films on the road must fall movement called Everything Must Fall, and it's tonight at 8, and it ties into a lot of the questions that we are also addressing in this panel. So now let me share my screen, and to give you an idea of the structure of this afternoon. So we are here, okay. We are already lagging a little bit behind, but this was the initial planning of the timetable, so then you know what to expect. So we will start, every speaker, every participant in the panel would start with a 10-minute opening statement, starting with Professor Oloron Toba, and then Bertus Haverkort will speak on partly on behalf of himself, but also of Professor Miller. I know Professor Ditmars is here. I have not yet seen Prof. Akinrinde and Dalila, so we might win some time there. We just have to see. And then after every one of the participants have given their opening statement in 10 minutes, we'll have a roundtable discussion. And then after about 20-25 minutes, this is not set in stone, we will move to questions. And we're planning of having a break at 15:45. So just that you know that, of course, this will not happen exactly as it is written here, but just that this is kind of the timetable that is in the back of our minds. So you know what to expect. And then we go to the second 5 speakers, starting with Oluwasola Ojo. And then we all will finish again with the paper of Professor Roca. So there will not be complete papers. For the complete papers, you can find them on the website, but the opening or the main argument will be laid out in the opening statements. And then we'll go to another round of roundtable discussion, question, and the final remarks will be given by, I think, Sarah Cummings and also Professor Oloron Toba at the end. So we can finish at 6. Brief conversation about me. I'm a graduate student at the Utrecht in the history of science, officially at Utrecht University, but I'm very much interested in the shift from the history of science to the field is transforming itself in the history of knowledge, which means an expansion threefold towards the humanities and the social sciences, but also to artisanal knowledge, and specifically also to non-Western indigenous knowledge. And it's coming at them from a principle of equal footing, which is, of course, also one of the central tenets of our discussion today. If you want to know, there's a specific nexus concerning the history of knowledge in the Netherlands. Maybe this is an interesting link to maybe understand your own research also in this context. So it's the Journal for the History of Knowledge.org. Then I will go into practical matters. I see a lot of people are already putting off their cameras. I think it's also nice to see who's in the room for this entire conversation. So I would invite you to generally have your camera on, but only for the roundtable discussion, put them off, just so that we can see the speakers of all the we can see the images of all the camera of all the panel members together. So we otherwise it's because. What did you say?
Okay.
I don't understand. So, but I will generally invite you to have your camera on for the moment, but just during the roundtable discussion, maybe put them off so we have all the images of the panel members together. And then when we move to questions, I would invite you to put your name in the chat. Then I know that you are interested in asking a question. And then when I I call out your name, you put your camera on and you ask your question to whoever you want to address it to. So having gone through these practical matters, I will put away my, go back to my own image and maybe start off the conference by giving the word to Professor Olurintoba for his first 10 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. And I want to thank the organizers of the conference for this magnificent conference, which has lasted, I think, 2 months now. It's really been very enjoyable. And I want to thank the co-organizers of the panel too for this opportunity to set the ball rolling. I just want to take a few seconds to respond to what Professor Rocha said about not liking the word decolonization, because it keeps turning us to the question of colonization. And I think I take an opposite view to that. It's a question that keeps cropping up when the debilitating conditions of the African mentioned. People say, oh, why do you keep going back to colonialism? But we do have to keep going back to that because it was a cataclysmic intervention in African life and African society. It affected everything from economics to religion to relations, interpersonal and social relations, to issues of gender and to questions of identity. So it's everything that's affected, and that's why we keep having to go back to it and having to say we need to decolonize. We have a saying in my place, I am Yoruba, that when you ask the cripple why the load that he's carrying on his head is bent, he says, look at what's happening downstairs. And it's the same thing with colonialism and Africa. You don't amputate somebody, and then when he says, I can't walk, he says, oh, no, don't keep talking about that amputation. Of course, he or she has to keep talking about that amputation. And I think the theme of the conference, Africa Knows, is apt, and the theme of decolonization is also very apt indeed. On that note, I'm going to try and share my screen and begin the presentation. Okay. Right. I have quite a few slides. I'm not going to attend to every slide, but I'll see what I can do about most of it. I'm talking about integrating African indigenous knowledge towards policy changes and a bi-system curriculum in the academy. My name is Taiwo Rontoboju. I'm based in the University of Ilorin, but currently I'm in the University of Chemnitz in Germany, where I'm visiting as an Alexander von Humboldt Foundation scholar. I want to talk about using the curriculum or the curriculum as a tool for colonization and therefore as a potential tool for decolonization and the dissemination of African indigenous knowledge. I also want to talk about the argument for the critical role of language in African indigenous knowledge production and dissemination, and talk about the procedure for the decolonization, or for this decolonization via policy changes and a bi-system curriculum. If I have some time, I'll also talk about the argument for the universal commonality of cognitive processes and of knowledge, and so on. These are the perspectives that I want to pursue in the presentation. Decolonization as imperative, and what I said in my opening statement is a matter that has been pursued by critical African scholars for decades. And we remember that Frantz Fanon, up to Ngugi, Pra, and at the level of language, people like Oshundari from Nigeria, people who have talked about the imperative of decolonization, and Africanity, whose objective is to find a subject place within the context of African history. We hold the view, or I hold the view, that language is a key to cognition and knowledge, and therefore a key to an important instrument of decolonization. I'm going to talk a bit more about this as I proceed. And the tool that I will be employing is the lexicosemantic analysis, which, amongst other things, looks at semantic fields and how words are mapped onto concepts. And with a note that the different ways by which cultures map words onto concepts are critical for an examination of indigenous knowledge representations, as I will also try to show in the little time that I have. Okay, I'll skip this for a moment. Problem of exclusion and ordinary, I'll also skip that for a moment and skip this for a moment and go straight on to the issue of the role of language. The point to make here is that language is central to decolonization and development of Africa. It's in fact so central. Ngugi wa Thiong'o described it as the bullet by means of which African was subjugated, and especially spiritually. And I want to put in the fact that decolonization and integration of African indigenous knowledge must factor in a role for indigenous languages. African indigenous knowledge has been muted over time by silencing the associated languages in the process of colonization and neocolonization. And since language is the gateway to indigenous knowledge, or to any knowledge for that matter, It is also the conduit for the transmission of knowledge. And to destroy it, therefore, as has been done in Africa, to destroy indigenous language is to destroy the associated knowledge. So what we are saying is that language being so key, the decolonization process demands that language is employed as a tool for the rejuvenation of the African psyche and society, especially the use of the mother tongue, which UNESCO itself has said since 1953 was the best for the acquisition of knowledge and the production of knowledge as well. I have proposed 5 steps towards this decolonization process, the colonization of the curriculum. As I have said before, the curriculum is this tool of continued colonization of Africa. There's a tool through which the education of Africans remain Western and colonized. And therefore, it should be the tool by which the decolonization is to take place. First, we need awareness. There are a number of African countries that have shown this kind of awareness, especially Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Tanzania, the Eastern and Southern African countries, but not the same thing can be said for West African countries and other parts of Africa. So this awareness is important, and then the demonstration of the will to transform the situation. And for every curriculum, every table of contents in the classroom, we need to identify the components that that constitute continued colonization, and add correctional policies, and then systematically implement the policies. I have placed on the right column some of the obstacles, but the one that I want to focus on is the absence of linguistic legacy. The absence of linguistic legacy, that is the lack of language input to catalyze indigenous inquiry. And I want to demonstrate that with this this table. What you can see on this table, these are representations that I have taken out of Wikipedia, representations of education, which the Germans call Bildung. And what I want to draw attention to is the fact that we have differences, as you can see in the left column here. Let's see if I can get it better. Okay, so as you can see here, the representation in English goes back to ascribed origins of Latin, whereas the German Bildung goes back to Germanic origins. The same concept, but the same as different ascribed origins. And we also have different connotations. Here we have things like breeding, rearing, and here we have the idea of conception and imagination. So what we are seeing is that on the right column, you have the concept is tied to local experience and local incidents. You also have a difference in terms of agency. You can see there's active and personal agency here. I educate, I train, whereas there's passive and impersonal here. A person's personal knowledge, a higher education to be formed, and so on and so forth. So there's also difference at that level. And there's difference at the level of epistemic orientation and conceptual emphasis and the semantic fields, which you can also see in the bolded forms here. Now, what I want to draw attention to is, now assume a situation where Germany was colonized and had to engage the knowledge space through the English language. What that means is that everything in the right column here disappears. everything here just goes, because the language that is needed to plumb the depth of knowledge in that area is missing. And all that they would have had, and which is all that we have in Africa, is this column. So this just goes to demonstrate how language drives knowledge, how language drives indigenous knowledge, and how decolonization requires the input of language. I have other examples, but I won't go into them now. I also have examples from Dutch in Netherlands, and the same system of engagement of the local realities and local environment through the instrumentality of the local language, which is what is missing in a number of situations. I have some sample curricula here. If you look at this curriculum, this content that we have, I'm not naming where it's coming from, but it's a university in Africa. And what you can see here in this entire column is a knowledge inquiry that derives totally and completely from the West. So you can see the ancient age of philosophy, medical renaissance age of philosophy, modern period, and so on. So you can occasionally have a tokenist input of what is called ideas of African philosophy, but in the main, it's subordinated to Western views. Anybody who knows anything about drama will immediately see that this entire segments of this curriculum is drawn from Western concepts of drama. And if you are in doubt, you can see here, origin of drama. The word drama comes from the Greek word dran, etc., etc., etc. Whatever happens to drama in Africa? So again, this is an illustration of how the absence of linguistic agency and the absence of policy to encapsulate indigenous knowledge within the system is doing a lot of havoc to the very concept of indigenous knowledge. So what I've called a bi-system approach is something that is meant to contest the knowledge space. Sorry? Something to contest the knowledge space. It involves, there is what we call a bilingual education or a bilingual approach, but I am suggesting that the emphasis here is on language. And what we have at the end of the day is simply a transmission of Western or foreign knowledge in indigenous language. It amounts to the same thing ultimately, but the bi-system approach involves knowledge and language. You can call it a bi-knowledge approach. And I have three main categories of involvement here. You have inclusion, you have comparison, and you have synthesis, which have tried to itemize here. Inclusion implies itemizing the elements of indigenous language for every topic, for every single subject. And then naming, indigenous naming is an exact requirement. As I've shown earlier, without indigenous names, you cannot attract or you cannot examine indigenous knowledge. Then the elements of defining, describing, the general and specific exposition. This inclusion answers the question, what? What are these elements of indigenous knowledge that we are inputting or integrating with the curriculum?
You have 2 minutes left.
Sorry?
You have 2 minutes left.
2 minutes left, thank you very much. Comparison involves juxtaposition of aspects of indigenous knowledge with the already explicit Western knowledge. Juxtaposition and justification, i.e., why does it matter and how does it relate to the explicit knowledge? So when we talk about juxtaposition and justification, what are the aspects of gender, for example? What are the issues, gender issues that are unique or particular or germane to the West, and what are those from Africa or from the indigenous environment? So we juxtapose them and we compare them. Then we find justification for continuing in one line of inquiry or another. And of course, at every point in time, we want to relate to the indigenous reality. And synthesis involves integration, conclusion, prognostication, what it entails in practical terms, how the synthesis relates to reality. I have the paper on the web and you can look at it. I'll just conclude with the 1 minute that I have left, that task of integrating indigenous knowledge content in the curriculum in African institutions is an enormous one, simply because the curricula show that colonial education is deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness, including the leadership and authorities at various levels of engagement. So this task would have to be facilitated by enabling laws and policies and involve the academia as well as a cross-section of leaders and opinion molders in the society. The biosystem approach means integrating indigenous knowledge, not just the language, not just transmitting explicit Western knowledge in indigenous languages, no, but integrating the knowledge itself, entailing, as I have said, inclusion, comparison, and synthesis. This would go a long way in helping to achieve the objective of decolonization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope you can stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
And I want to invite Professor Bertus Haverkort to join us and present his paper, which he wrote in collaboration with Professor Dr. Miller, David Miller, who unfortunately cannot be here today. I think if we all pin Bertus Haverkort.
Yeah, I'm happy to take part in this conference, although I must say I'm not so happy that my dear friend David Miller cannot take part for health reasons. But I will briefly introduce him. He is on the screen now. On the left-hand side, you see his picture. And on the bottom, you see him in action, addressing a Queen Mother in Wenchi, addressing a community in Tongo, and being with a father and a small child in another village in his area. David has been born in the northwestern part of Ghana and has lived there for all his life. He has remained there despite his academic career. And at this moment, he is a professor in a university for development studies in Tamale, and he has started his own university. Okay. Then on my own, I'll be very brief. I was born in the Netherlands on a small farm, and I've been working in agricultural development and in communication and in indigenous knowledge in countries like Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, India, Sri Lanka, and here you see some of my pictures in action there. And I had the real pleasure to be able to work together with David Miller since 1978. For more than 40 years, we have been colleagues and friends very much. We started in 1978 in the Green Revolution top-down World Bank funded bilateral development program for agricultural development. And since that was not very successful, we were moving then to agricultural agroecological approaches with participatory technology development. And we were the main initiators of an international exchange program on this type of approach, agroecology and participatory approaches. And from there, we realized that when you talk about agroecology, local knowledge and local resources are important. So we started to study more and more the role of indigenous knowledge and how we could use indigenous knowledge as the basic for development. And we've adopted an approach that we called endogenous development from within. And we started another program which is called Compass, which was focusing very much on the role of cosmovision and the role of spirituality and the role of indigenous institutions in rural communities. That moved on to a university program to also develop more research and educational programs in the program that we call Captured. We had international cooperation with organizations in Latin America and India. And finally, David started his own university program with a focus on endogenous development and learning from within and working together with local leaders and local healers. And our main learning path has been one of deschooling. We had to change our perspective and started to see people as partners in our own learning process and no longer as a target of education or an object of study. So in the Compass program, that was an international cooperation for enhancing indigenous knowledge. This took place in 14 different countries in Latin America, Peru, Bolivia, Guatemala, Mexico, in Asia, in India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and so on. And a number of African countries like Ghana, Uganda, South Africa, Zimbabwe. And in this international cooperation, what we learned, in fact, that worldwide, local knowledge is being marginalized and being substituted by mainstream sciences. But at the same time, we saw that in rural communities, also in urban communities, indigenous knowledge has gone underground. It is still influential. It's still important for people to take decisions. They use indigenous knowledge and indigenous values. And indigenous knowledge in all places in the world, apart from in the West, people saw indigenous knowledge or saw the reality and then the cosmovision in three worlds. They saw, apart from the human world, they saw the spiritual world and also the natural world as the main elements of the cosmovision, of the reality. Whereas in our Western science, we only mainly look at material side of the reality. And even social science and social phenomena are being considered as an expression of a material reality. So there's a big difference between, let's say, the worldview and the cosmovision in many of the indigenous communities and mainstream science. So therefore, we saw a need for endogenous development to strengthen indigenous knowledge communities, and we used the approach of participatory action research for that. And we also saw the need that there is a need for new professionals who understand indigenous knowledge and respect it, and have the ambition to work together with local communities to strengthen the local knowledge. There was also a need for other training methods and training materials, and also a need for new institutions which are no longer streamlined and shaped by the colonial rules, but are based on their own needs and possibilities in the local knowledge communities. And also in our cooperation with countries like India and Bolivia, it was important to see that we can learn very much together if you take the perspective of the South rather than the perspective of the North. And in the course of the time, we started to share a vision that indigenous knowledge is not just a compilation of interesting technologies or practices that you can see in the field, but we started to see indigenous knowledge as an expression of an indigenous science. So indigenous knowledge is an expression of indigenous science. That was an important notion that we realized. And then we also wondered, in fact, if you say it that way, then what are the main elements of science that you then should try to understand also in indigenous cases? Well, the cosmovision has already been mentioned also by other people. There's a culture-specific understanding of the reality. That's the starting point. But on that basis, people have chosen a certain value system, what they think is important in their reality, in their perspective of the perception of the reality. And also taking into account those values, they take and adopt and use certain methods of learning and methods of innovation. And on the basis of what they are learning and seeing, they develop a certain theoretical framework and a set of technologies. And all this is applied, modified, and assessed by local knowledge communities. So these 5, cosmovision, values, methods of learning, their own theoretical frameworks, and the knowledge community, we have considered as the basic elements of indigenous sciences. We've tried to understand local knowledge, local science in these concepts. And just to give a small example of the community in which David Miller had done much of his research near Bolgatanga in Ghana, the Gruni community, where we have been working together to interview and work together with indigenous in trying to understand, let's say, the scientific basis of the community in Tongo. We talked with indigenous experts like the earth priests, the soothsayers, community leaders. We visited sacred places, took part in rituals, and had dialogues with communities. And for them, the cosmovision is a concept that consists of a complex reality with the creator, the All Father, with different names, different types of gods, the rain god, the earth god. Also, Muslim gods and Christian gods are there. There are sacred places and sacred shrines. You have spiritual leaders like soothsayers, diviners, healers, sorcerers. You have the different ritual crops and sacred trees. You have the founder of the village. You have also Mother Nature with fauna, trees, soil, fertility, rain, water, and so on. So this complexity, this wholeness is what they consider to be the reality. And also when you look at, let's say, the other 4 elements of science, the values people have is very much dominated by respect for the sacred nature, respect for ancestors, spirits, and community and families are important for them. They learn through communication with ancestors. For me, that was a very interesting and new discovery that you can communicate with ancestors, and soothsayers play a role. Storytelling is an important way of learning. So language, indeed, as the previous speaker said, is an important way of communication and learning. The theories people are using is not so much, let's say, the natural sciences that we have learned in schools, but for them, nature is the habitat of spirits. There is a good and evil forces that have to be addressed by sacrifices and by consultations. And the knowledge communities assess and modify knowledge, and they are composed of spiritual leaders, tribal heads, the elders in the communities, and they apply and test the different experiences and knowledge and innovations. And similarly, we saw, in fact, similar practices in other countries. On this slide, you see on the left-hand side a ritual of people in the Andes, in a potato field, where they are welcoming the new potatoes and dedicate and offer these new potatoes to Pachamama, Mother Nature, in a process of reciprocity. Then you see in Sri Lanka a shaman doing a ritual in a rice field, addressing the pests, the aphids and all the other pests, and he asks them not to take more than their fair share. They can have part of it, but not to take more. In the middle right, you see...
You have 2 minutes left.
You see Zimbabwe, you see a spiritual medium taking part in tree planting. You see an Indian spiritual leader who has herbal treatment. And what we saw in all countries, that mainstream sciences are marginalizing indigenous sciences very much by rejecting indigenous knowledge, by suppressing it, by substituting it by modern science, and selectively including some of the knowledges in the mainstream science. And rather than continuing with this marginalization, we were trying to find out and develop a method where there will be exchange at the level of worldview, dialogues on the level of worldview, ancestor-centered worldviews and the interconnected manifest worldview of the Indian sciences, the Pachamama-centered worldview in Bolivia, and the worldview of the materialist Western sciences could be exchanged. And on that basis, in our programs, we were carrying out two different activities. One is endogenous development by participatory action research, which was focusing on strengthening indigenous sciences by articulating, understanding, and improving their cosmovision, their values, their theories, and so on. And secondly, co-creation of each of these 5 elements by exchange, joint learning between people in similar communities, so within Africa, within Ghana, and learning and exchange between knowledge communities from different cultures. So also exchange between Bolivia and Ghana and India. And in that process, we have been working together for about 15 years. We produced different things like a book on agroecology, guidelines on and documentation of participatory methods, cosmovisions in different countries, teaching guides, and so on. And they are all online available. David Miller has his own university, and what he is teaching there are things like transdisciplinarity and culture, concepts and methods for endogenous development, philosophy of sciences, African philosophy, action research methods, participatory action research, where he has the local knowledge community is playing an active role. And the topics of research he is doing is very much related to the worldviews and knowledge development on things like traditional nature management, healing, food, economics, gender, ethnic and identity, governance, and so on. And the main results of this type of research and education is that he shapes and forms and new professionals who have this different orientation from the community and from endogenous perspective. And the thesis and the diploma are not the main focus. They are byproducts that have to be used in conventional knowledge systems, but the most important thing is that they shapes and educates new professionals, and that the local knowledge communities are being supported in their dynamics and in their learning process. Well, finally, we also have been thinking about how could this endogenous knowledge development be enhanced on the basis of our experience of international and intercultural and intercontinental cooperation. We find it very important that we support international activities to advocate, to improve exchange and upscale activities by maybe, first of all, formulate a high-level policy statement that expresses the need, the justification, and the perspective of endogenous knowledge development and of co-creation of sciences. And I think maybe that's an important thing also for this conference to formulate. And secondly, to set up a collaborative program of a number of collaborative programs which do some things like advocacy, inventorize available theories, approaches, and resources, and make it available, undertake widespread knowledge development activities, share, exchange, and improve teaching materials for different levels of education, publish the results in open source, international exchange programs of students, staff, and policymakers, and also decolonize institutions for education and research. And for that, we suggest maybe we should look for a steering committee that can have, let's say, as a task to seek policy support, funding, and set up a system of support of the different task forces. Well, with these recommendations, I think we have to conclude. That's my time, and our time is over. I'm sorry that David could not be here, but I will share with him your comments on these proposals. Thank you.
Okay, a lot of that will be discussed in the roundtable and later on. I will now give the word to Madi Ditmars. So if you can stop sharing your screen, and then we all pin Madi and let her share her screen.
Well, thank you very much. It's also an honor for me to be here and to partake in this conference. A lot of the things I was going to say has actually been said by Baptist before me, and Prof. Olorantoba who addressed linguistics. I'm not going to be talking about the linguistic aspect, but carefully or definitely acknowledging that it's absolutely intrinsic part of the things I'm going to be looking at. Let me just see how I'm going to page here. Sorry, I'm working from two screens, so I just need to, okay. Basically, I just want to start off by acknowledging the fact that one of the reasons why we are so desperately looking at including all forms of Indigenous knowledge and local knowledge in the whole big global pool of knowledge is not only because of pressures to decolonize, but it is basically because we have no option. Our planet is in trouble, and it is only with our own human cognitive capacity that we will be able to overcome this. In 2015 already, the UNESCO brought out their Knowledge Society, stressing that that it is necessary that all forms of knowledge need to be connected, but also warning about the supremacy and excluding certain or other forms of knowledge out of the global curriculum. And actually, just to reinforce that, I want to say that the significance of North-South partnerships in education in general, but specifically in higher education, is acknowledged, but there's not really very much experience on how we can do this. Bertus has been speaking of Indigenous science, which I really want to applaud, thinking in that direction is the direction that we have to start looking. Basically, there's this dichotomy between globalization and internationalization and Africanization and decolonization. And it's as if it's two opposing poles, each with its own agenda. And this was enforced through research that I was doing at the NAFIC SEED program. It was an agri-business triple helix program between Dutch knowledge institutes and South African higher institutes and governments and other NGOs working in the agricultural industry. And it was housed by the NESA office of NAFIC in Pretoria. Through discussions, a few things that I just want to highlight that again, I think just reinforces and confirms what is continuously being said about the difficulties that educators have in incorporating local or Indigenous knowledge in their curricula. And just very basically, lack of scientific rigor, undocumented. The youth is not interested anymore because they want to move towards modernity. They often see it themselves as inferior and outdated. They want to learn knowledge that will enable them to kickstart them to become part of a global world. Yeah? The academics themselves also admitted that they are academics in a specific scientific direction or discipline, and they have very little knowledge and understanding of other ontologies and epistemologies and how to bring that into their curriculum. And lastly, which was confirmed by most of the people that I spoke to, is that Indigenous knowledge is so holistic, and there is no way they can include it in their general academic disciplines. For me to understand this whole thing and to see where can we start to understand knowledge and what knowledge is, I had to go back to what Martijn started this conference off as looking at the history of knowledge. And actually, if you put this whole thing in context, for me, it was kind of as if little blocks in the puzzle started to fall in place. Basically thinking that over a period of 2 or 3 million years ago, we as humanity started to evolve out of Africa and from there spread throughout the rest of the world. And then in that time, it took so much time that by 10,000 BC, only started the cultivation of land and domestication of animals, which, by the way, prompted by climatic changes. And that started in that Mesopotamia area, which includes the northeastern part of Africa as well, right down into Sudan and the Nuara civilizations. That was the beginning of humanity using their cognitive and their thinking capacity to rise up above a position of just being part of nature. And in my paper, I've gone through all the periods, and you're welcome to download and have a look at it at internet. And it is quite interesting to see how just basic knowledge and skills, we started to learn how to document it, keep it in libraries, repositories, building institutions where people started coming together from all the world to learn and exchange knowledge, and how certain civilizations through their knowledge grew and became more powerful and conquered or colonialized others. And in that spreading knowledge, but also the role that economy and trade played in that. And for example, the Renaissance that was kickstarted by the Black Death, and how this all led to a few key points of what I take out of this whole. By the way, I just have to mention here, China and South America, the Mayas and Inca civilizations also play a role in this, but I've excluded it in my paper. Okay. Basically, just coming down to the few points. Every aspect of human knowledge stems from this Fertile Crescent area, which includes Africa. And the expansion and accumulation of knowledge is a progressive process. Yeah. There's always been cross-fertilization between knowledge seekers in the world. Higher education has, since its conception, and that dates back right to the Persian civilizations, has always brought together best scholars in the world. Yeah? Another thing that I gathered from this whole historical view is that epistemes cannot be separated from what happens in the world around us, our natural environment. It cannot be separated from economic conditions, and it cannot be separated from politics. And lastly, in all of this, knowledge is social, culturally determined, and it is deeply embedded in civilizations and societies' ontological worldviews. And we can look at what Prof. Olorantuba just said about language and how you express yourself, because these are things that are very difficult to express. And it is only if you understand the language and you understand the psyche of people, if you understand their religion, that you can really get to transfer knowledge in a way that it becomes part and parcel of the people that you are sharing your knowledge with. And basically, I think it's been said many times or used many times already, but I still find it a very powerful comparison. If you compare the European Western world and African philosophies and ontologies, is the concept that you find in Africa of mutuke batu, a person is a person because of other people. Whereas the Cartesian, I think, therefore I am, humanistic approach. And in essence, I think from where I look at this whole thing of knowledge sharing is that is where the crux of the matter is. And on the other hand, we're sitting in a global world with pressures that we have to adapt, that we have to work together, we have no choice, the clock is ticking. And then there's technology, the world in which we're living now, with everything that digitization brings us. including 21st century learning skills. And as we have all now, in times of Corona, learned the value of technology, but in transferring information and knowledge, it has tremendous powers that we can use to get people together from different knowledge systems to communicate, where we can use to share their thoughts, to question, to understand where each other's coming, where they're each, differently coming from, to collaborate, to work together, to co-create, to critically think and look at new ways and link things. And most of all, what brings the possibility of creativity. And that is what I think at the moment that we need, is we need to step out of this compartmentalized knowledge systems that we have. And they're real. I'm not saying they're not real, but we need to break through and reach out to all the knowledge systems that there are in the world. And technology offers us that tool.
You have 2 minutes.
I'm finished.
Okay, well, that's great.
So, how's that for timing?
Okay, that's great.
Thank you very much, Marijn. Thank you very much to the 3 presenters for your very interesting presentations. I was just wondering, when you each of you brought up the exchange different ways of learning, how to what extent do you see exchange, for example, through video platforms, exchange of by young people of their realities, their values, their experiences, their knowledge? To what extent would that be a way of really shared learning and cross-cultural learning and really communal learning, sharing different communities?
So if I'm understanding the question right, it's about how can we use this social media for the goals that we just discussed? Is that a good way of framing it?
Do you?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask Professor Oloruntoba to maybe respond to that? And then later I will go to Bertha Saverkort and Maddy Dismers.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. The social media development is obviously a welcome one, and it has been used to good effect. In a way, some of the good things that are happening, even in the educational sector, is happening through social media, including the invitations, the sharing of information, all manner of information. So it has actually helped excellently well. The main problem that we have with social media is that it's usually pigeonholed within a certain domain, that is the domain of entertainment, small talk, gossip, libel, slander, etc., etc. And because of this pigeonholing or stereotyping, many people may not really advert their mind to the fact that it can also be a source of serious information or knowledge sharing. That's one setback that social media constitutes in terms of what we're talking about, indigenous knowledge. On the other hand, it has also proved useful for people from all walks of life, also weighing in on information that may sometimes be considered to be of academic value. I remember, for example, that just the last week, and again it has happened that people on social media enter into debate about the validity of the continued use of colonial languages. I referred to this in my talk on Friday on another subject, on a related subject, where people are actually discussing amongst themselves. What happened was that somebody within the social system in Nigeria was suddenly cast in the mode of heroism. He became a hero because he led a group of people to repel an attack by some marauding herdsmen. And he was not necessarily a military person. He was not he was not a uniformed person. He does not belong to the police force or the army or whatever. But he just rose and said, "No, this is enough," and went to led a group of people to repel an attack, and he instantly became a hero. But all of a sudden, somebody who was commenting on social media said, "Wait a minute, I'm surprised. This fellow cannot even speak English." And that sparked a lot of furore because people started wondering, wait a minute, this person is a hero. He has done so much. What has his being able to speak English or not being able to speak English, what has that got to do with it? So there was a lot of debate that went on social media in that regard. And some of the examples that we have been using in our academic discourses also come from social media. Exchanges between youths, those of us working with youth languages, people working with gender. There's a lot of information, a lot of data that is coming through social media, detailing the realities of people and how they live their lives, what their expectations are, and what they would like to see done with regard to gender, with regard to the economy, with regard to living abroad, with regard to the pandemic. So a lot of information sharing takes place. I know that Professor Roka is going to talk about the pandemic thing, but you can see a lot of information being shared about home remedies for the pandemic, the dangers of the vaccine, the dangers that the vaccines might pose to Black people, etc., etc. So there's no doubt about that the social media has proved to be a veritable source of knowledge and of information that scholars might use. However, the caveat must still sorry, you are muted.
Can I ask Madi Ditmars to respond now to the question?
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Now you are muted. I think people will never learn this, but
no, it's crazy. But when you're so enthusiastic, you just want to jump in and talk. But I think where Prof. Orion Tuba was going to go, correct me if I'm wrong, Prof. But I mean, there are the dangers in it, obviously, but we're all aware of it with misinformation and false information. But personally, not only social media, Ivana, and thank you for asking this question, because internet and Web 2.0 tools are incredibly powerful in education and sharing knowledge. We, for example, from Leiden University, for our minor students, we put up a 4-week online course in which we invited students from African universities to participate. And we structured the exchange of knowledge and information and insights within this online course. And it was really amazing to see what happens with students and how they can actually build bridges and reach out and start understanding where another person comes from, their views. And I'm personally see that as the future. I see it as the greatest tool that we have, because what we did previously of flying students from Europe to Africa, and Africa students who mostly couldn't afford to come to Europe, so they were again marginalized. Internet is opening that up and making it possible for us to really collaborate.
I think also it's an interesting question to Professor Haverkort, since you have this, this dialogue between scientific worldviews in India and in South America and in Africa. So how do you see the role of let's say, internet, those platforms we have all become accustomed to, like this platform here? How do you see this role in this intercultural exchange?
Well, in fact, indeed, this internet has been very important and very instrumental to enable us to communicate between Bolivia, Ghana, and India. Also, for in times of Corona, that is, you can continue with classes on the internet and so on. So, in that sense, yes, I'm very positive about the potentials. Having said that, I also feel that there is a danger. There is a danger of continuing to substitute traditional communication media by this modern impersonal way of communicating. And I'm sure David Miller is very much outspoken on this. I know that I learned that from him. I give an example, for example. When he started to work in one community, in one of the rural communities, one of the elders said to David, well, I've been visited very much by researchers and all these people. They ask questions, they write books about us, and we never get anything back from what you are doing here. So, if you are really serious about being interested in our cosmovision and so on, then we have to consult our ancestors, and we have to process you. So you have to be initiated in our ancestral community before we can have really a communication that we can trust. Otherwise, we are continuing the role play of giving answers to you and you asking questions and you publish our results. So this initiation as a means of communication, as a condition for communication in the internal traditional community, is a completely different communication system than through social media.
Yeah.
Another example, I once was teaching in Bogotá, and I started the question, what is each of the students, your personal family totem? Well, that's a question that was never asked in those classes before, but I learned that this personal family totem is an important identity factor. And then we saw people who had the same totem were put together in subgroups, and they were talking about their identity from this perspective. So again, this is something you cannot do on the internet. Storytelling is a very important thing. Indigenous knowledge is a very important thing. Communication from the elders to the young people is important. All these type of communication are important and maybe need some reinforcement, need some recognition, and do not replace or even could be endangered or marginalized by this modern media. So yes, important, but at the same time, I don't think so. It should be the only thing.
No, I think the medium is demanding in itself, and it's kind of already is a epistemology or an ontological fact in a sense, as much as the language is, as Professor Olowen Toba made so clear in his paper.
Yeah.
I had a second question or second questioner from Paul Engel. So I'm also very aware of the fact that most of us are now speaking in English, where it might be not our native language, which already means an adaptation and in a certain sense a loss, whereas also it enables us to communicate with each other. So it is a double-edged sword. I think, Paul Engel, you had a question.
Yes. It occurred to me that our speakers are addressing what goes wrong and what can go right through decolonizing minds and knowledge. At the same time, I miss a discussion, and maybe I should say, I've been working in policy spheres for a long time. After having tried to get action-oriented or participatory action research accepted in several universities with not so much success. We don't discuss, who the colonizer is. What is the vector in this whole process of colonization, and hence the one you have to tackle if you want to decolonize. The professor said something about language, which I very much share. I think language is a very important part, and I agree very much with your observation that the social media are structured in a very much colonized way. So they certainly contribute. So my question to you is really, isn't scientific method itself the colonizer? Because every time I was trying to introduce participatory action research in a university curriculum, and I've tried to do that in the Netherlands or in Chile and in Africa, and etc. The real argument was, the argument to stop it was that it wasn't scientific enough. Now, all kinds of reasons. But so I'm just asking myself, shouldn't we also try to figure out what the vector is in the colonization, what the mechanism is? Because it has happened in the Netherlands. Everything Madi said about traditional knowledge, you could put to homeopathic medicine, for example, in the Netherlands. It has been marginalized. It has been traditional healing methods have been marginalized. The knowledge has been disappearing, so it is a universal phenomena almost that happens in societies where a particular type of knowledge becomes dominant and a standard to measure all other things against. So I think we need to understand what that factor is in order to find out what we can do about it, because I thought that's one of the interesting objectives of this seminar. Thank you.
And maybe Professor Oloruntoba likes to respond.
Yeah.
If anyone else has questions, please put your name in the chat, and I will give you the word after Professor Oloruntoba.
Yeah, thank you very much. The issue of the scientificity or otherwise of indigenous knowledge, I think we need to separate that from the problem of codification, i.e. a certain kind of knowledge exists. It has not been published or it has not been codified. I think it's called tacit knowledge. It remains internal. It's not been made explicit, and it's not been universalized. I think that these are two different things: the codification, the publication, codification of knowledge, and the scientific process involved in the production of knowledge. I think the scientific process is clear. The process of inquiry, the process of trial, whether you're talking about vaccines or anti-malaria drugs, there's a process involved. And quite a number of indigenous societies have remedies for this, for ailments, but which perhaps because of the suppression, because the suppression of the environment and its knowledge systems has not been brought through a process of inquiry sufficient to codify it and certify it as being fit for universal usage. Medicine is a particularly a good example here. But there are people who are going to swear by the efficacy of the knowledge, and in the case of health, the medicines that they are producing, they're going to swear by the efficacy. If only they're going to be given the opportunity to try it out. So there is this dominance at the level of information management and at the level of funding opportunities. So take, for example, a product like an economic product like cocoa, which of course it's taken to the West and it's manufactured and refined and so on, and comes back as coffee. Now, the question is, who do you really acknowledge, or who do you give the rights of propriety to that knowledge of producing coffee? Is it the people who have managed to produce the cocoa so that you can use it and therefore constitute a part of the chain, or the numerous people who combine in the process of research because there's funding opportunity to come up with the final product? So I am saying that knowledge, knowledge is knowledge, and it can be applied once it becomes codified. It is the codification that becomes a problem in many cases, and that's because people have been deprived of the language with which to codify their products. So that they have to use languages that do not necessarily assist the process of knowledge production. So I think these two things I want to separate. The knowledge itself, which may be as scientific as you want, if you're going to put energy and funding into it.
There was a question in the chat, which I will read out. It's by Tom Dietz. Can it be that many African scientists have internalized colonial attitudes and mind frames and have separated their ultra-scientific act within universities from the personal, including religious lives they live? Internalized schizophrenia because they are supposed to do so to succeed or even survive in their academic careers. I see Professor Haverkort nodding, so maybe it's interesting for him to respond. Now you are muted again.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to share with you, in fact, when David Miller, in his position as even he was at that time Pro Vice Chancellor of the University for Development Studies in Tamale, was interested in studying and indigenous knowledge, and was discovering that this cosmovision and spirituality was an important part of that traditional knowledge. Within the university, he was not accepted. He was ridiculed. He was marginalized for this purpose, for this part of his work. And it was only because of the fact that he could show to the university's elite that this program was something, was part of an international, even transcontinental movement to give more prestige and more attention to the indigenous knowledge as such, that he was given the chance to do this work within the university. And indeed, there's a lot of those his colleagues. Well, they were graduated in Leiden or in Wageningen, and they had their knowledge and they had their prestige on that basis, and that was their strong point, of course. So if you then go interested in indigenous knowledge, which they have not studied before, which doesn't have a peer-reviewed magazine and so on, it's very difficult for them to go that route.
Yeah, if I unmute myself. I don't really have much else to add, except, yes, I agree with Prof. Dietz and Prof. Haverkort as well, that, yes, it does create a lot of tension. And I think a lot of people are torn apart by this binary oppositions nearly. And I I think it's the insider outsider positions really play a big role in this. So, yeah.
Professor Olorontoba, do you want to respond?
Well, I just want to add that sometimes what Professor Dietmars just said resonates when we are talking about the emic ethic perspective. And I was actually going to look for an opportunity to say this regarding the presentation by Professor Miller and Havercott, that sometimes even the scientists coming from outside have a perspective, maybe some things that they're looking for. Maybe they're looking for, when we're talking about education or knowledge and so on, they're looking for rituals. They're looking for ritual observances. They're looking for people who are making sacrifices. They're looking for worshippers, etc., etc. And these are stereotypic views of knowledge of Africa. I would say they are colonized views of knowledge from Africa. Of course, I'm from Africa. I don't make sacrifices. I don't do stuff like that. And when people are talking about some kinds of knowledges, I don't necessarily think in those directions. But spirituality is not restricted to Africa. Some of the, quite a number of scientists in the West that I know are quite fanatically religious, and they will do whatever in the name of religion. So I think we should also know that it cuts both ways. It cuts both ways in the sense that scientists always have to try and look at the overall picture and the objective in order to avoid this problem that we are talking about.
Okay, I will stop the conversation here. Do I see it right? Olawale Olufemi Akinrinde, you are here right now?
Yes, please. Olawale Olufemi Akinrinde is online.
Okay.
I'm with you, sir.
Okay, I would suggest that we take a break right now and we come back in half an hour. And let's start with your paper then. Because you, so we start with Olorontoba. Oh, sorry, I'm confusing names. So we start with your paper, Mr. Akinrinde, and then we go to Oluwaseun Ojo, and then we have probably also 5 papers in the next round, but I think everybody needs a break right now. I see some people nodding, so so I would invite everybody to be back here. You can just leave it open. We'll be back
in 30 minutes.
In 30 minutes, and then we start.
Marijn, I suggest to begin to be back a bit before the 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah. I think this is advised and very realistic. So maybe to try to come back, like say 5/4, 10/4, so we can really start on time. Let me introduce Olawale Akinrinde. Are you ready to share your presentation?
Thank you, Professor Mirin. I'm actually ready for my presentation, and a very warm greeting to everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. Olawale Olufemi Akinrinde is my name. I'm here to present a paper titled Globalism and Localism, the Irony of Local Knowledge Systems in Africa. Basically, this study is an attempt to examine the contending positions and impacts of globalism and localism on African knowledge system. No doubt, knowledge systems have been locally constructed world over. They have always been nurtured and afterwards deployed for the benefit of the society they have been developed to cater for. And this practically explains why every society at any material point in time is as developed as the level of development of the knowledge systems. Why plethora of data have confirmed that no society had ever developed actually beyond the capacity of a knowledge system, the African society has produced, nurtured, and deployed a number of workable indigenous systems that are now be overtaken and consigned to the bin of history by the influence of globalism and its concomitant forces. The African indigenous systems that were either too culture-bound and largely in tune to the realities of African needs and problems have now been excised by the introduction and subsequent adaptation of the forces of globalization into the mainstream of African knowledge system. That is why several Africa age-long methods of knowledge productions, dissemination and preservation, such as the practice of ascertaining whether a child is capable of reaching his or her years in order to determine if such a child has reached a matured age to be considered for an admission into the elementary school, and the idea of knowing the cultural and ethnic identities of an individual, especially an African, through facial and tribal marks have since gone into extinction as a result of the introduction of globalization. Much more so is another indigenous system of knowing the time of the day in many African societies before they adopted and imposed Gregorian time. The African way of knowing time, days, months, and years by studying the sun and the moon has been eventually abandoned and replaced by the Gregorian time and calendar system in the wake of Africa's contact with the West through the instrumentality of one, transatlantic trade and the slave trade. The globalization of Africa, the globalization of several Western indigenous knowledge systems and practices that were either too alien to most developing worlds such as Africa resulted in massive losses of African indigenous systems and practice. From the first contact of Africa with the West through the transatlantic trade in the 9th century, there has been a systematic replacement of African indigenous knowledge systems and practices with those of the Western knowledge systems through the instrumentality of the globalized international system. The unhindered, forceful, penetrative arms of globalization that overstretched the boundaries and limits of state sovereignty brought about the domestication of Western values and knowledge systems that were either too alien to African society. The implications of these are in many folds. This study is therefore an attempt to understand why many of the current knowledges and knowledge systems in Africa are now practical and consequential ironies with no value to the African society. Given the position of this study, stemming from its problematic, the current production and reproduction of African knowledge system in contemporary times have largely been counterproductive and antithetical to the cultural and philosophical makings of the African system. So basically, excuse me please, what this paper is set out to achieve is to examine why many of the things we are producing within the African continent as knowledge or indigenous knowledge systems have now been overtaken by many of the Western values, Western knowledge that have practically no relevance for the African society. And we can trace that to the introduction of globalization from the era of slave trade to the era of slave trade to the era of colonialism and then the current post-colonial system. Now, African practices and knowledge such as the idea of knowing if a child has actually come of age to be able to be admitted into an elementary school by ascertaining if he or she can, use his hand to touch his ears, has now been overtaken by Western education. So the position of this paper is that globalization is not only an instrument to ensure that African knowledge system is not only subservient, but continue to service the agenda of the West. And we have actually seen that in several actions and activities of majority of the Bretton Woods institution through the idea of foreign aids and scholarships. Many of the African knowledge systems, knowledges and the likes have now been exported to the European countries, to the West. And we are now witnessing not only the commercialization of African knowledge, where Africans do not only have to pay for their own knowledge system, they now have to struggle to have access to all these knowledge systems. Again, many of the African knowledge systems have now been restricted or conditioned to what the West actually want them to be. Instead of coming up with society relevant innovations, knowledge and the likes, many of our institutions, many of our knowledge systems, processes and institutions are now at the mercy, at the dictates, under the dictates of some of the Western organizations, especially the foreign donors and the likes. That is why when you see an African student writing a proposal or sending a proposal to many of these Western institutions, especially proposals that are not only relevant to the development of Africa, many of these proposals would be rejected or will later be fine-tuned to make it relevant to the developed countries. So basically, this paper discovers that globalization is not just a natural occurrence. Of course, at first, it was a natural occurrence, but later it was deployed, hijacked by many of the Western powers to ensure that Africa remain perpetually not only poor, because once your knowledge system is rendered useless, naturally your development process is as good as nothing. So the position of this paper is that for Africa and many of the third world countries to go back to the part of developmental process in which they were before their contact with the West, they need to first and foremost delink. Of course, that will be problematic again because he who pays the viper always dictates the tune. So Africa will need to pursue some radical innovation, some radical strategy in order to ensure that the knowledge system is completely free from the influences of the Western power. Knowledge systems, innovations that are relevant to the development of Africa must be encouraged and must be fully pursued by our leaders, especially the elites in Africa. Of course, that can never come without the instrumentality of economic powers, because even knowledge system, the production of knowledge itself, especially before they are codified, needs economic empowerment. So Africa and many of the third world countries must begin to look inward. We must begin to delink. Africa must begin to delink not only its knowledge system, but all its sectors from the influences of the Western, because globalization itself has done much harm to many of the third world states, third world countries than good. And for us to continue to be operating under the framework of globalization, then the possibility of Africa breaking free from the conundrum of underdevelopment, especially when it comes to knowledge production and when it comes to developing themselves,
you have 2 minutes left.
Would be almost impossible. And this paper concludes that globalization, Africa must begin to look inward. Globalization can never service the interests of Africa, especially when it comes to the knowledge system, when it comes to economic development. So Africa must begin to confront not only the forces of globalization. Of course, it will be practically impossible to completely delink, because we are now living in globalization. But many developed countries from developing world, especially the former Asia, the current Asian tigers, countries like Indonesia, countries like, they were able to look inward. They promoted their knowledge system, and they were able to. That is why many of the institutions are doing awesomely. So Africa must be able to delay. We must see globalization, not see globalization as an instrument that has continued to put African knowledge system at the detriment of some other interests, especially the Western power. So this paper is an attempt to bring to fore this debate and bring to fore debate as touching the issue of globalization and how it has affected African knowledge system. So I thank you. Like I said, this paper is a work in progress. It's going to be developed. So I so submit. Thank you.
Okay,
so just to introduce this slideshow by saying that the slides have relatively little to do with what we'll be talking about. They're for illustrative purposes rather than anything else. I will speak for 5 minutes now and then give the other 5 to Sarah, as we've just heard. So in this paper, which has been quite a while in the making, we approach the analysis of the gap between various discourses around local and biomedical knowledge by adopting the conceptual lens of social capital and by using discourse analysis. To remind, discourse analysis, it's a collective name for a number of scientific methodologies for analyzing semiosis, namely how meaning is created and communicated through different means of communication. So the discourses that we're looking at, one is the health discourse, the health development discourse. How is knowledge, local and other knowledge, included in the global effort to improve health around the world? This can be characterized by 3 frameworks that have been introduced. The first of these was called Health for All by the year 2000. This was a consequence of the Alma-Ata Declaration of 1978, and the idea was that we would all be healthy by the year 2000. When we proved not to be healthy in the year 2000, the UN stepped in and established the Millennium Goals, Millennium Development Goals. The MDGs were the first attempt at a multi-sectoral treatment of health, of development. In other words, the health sector, agriculture, every sector was included in the Millennium Development Goals. And we were supposed to be developed by the year 2015, according to those goals. When this proved to be not the case, the Sustainable Development Goals started. They were adopted, the SDGs, they were adopted as a part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And it was adopted by all UN member states in 2015. So that's been the kind of framework for development. And the question that we ask is, how does knowledge, how is information treated in this process? The answer is quite short. It's not really treated at all. Knowledge in the Sustainable Development Goals, and I know because I've been pushing for this, is considered to be a cross-cutting theme. Everything has knowledge in it, so there's no need to have a separate goal for knowledge management. There's an argument that there's something in SDG 17 and so on. There are little bits and pieces of knowledge scattered throughout the whole thing. So whether it's local knowledge or any other kind of knowledge that is considered, this is absent largely from the SDGs. And I think I've been part of a group that's been pushing to try to introduce knowledge into the health SDGs, into the Universal Health Development Goal. And that's been a slow process, except that as soon as the COVID came onto the horizon, and associated with COVID, the infodemic that accompanied it, where the velocity and volume of information became unmanageable, and a lot of the information that was coming out was misinformation or disinformation. It's clear that this whole discourse is very alive right now, and it's actually, for those of us who have been trying to push knowledge into the SDGs, this is a good moment, strange as it may seem. The other discourse, and I'll just finish quite soon, is related to the integration of knowledge and of local knowledge and wider knowledge. I think this is most visible in the area of traditional medicine. As the next slide, I think, asks, it's a fact that's often repeated, but in the next one, I think, Sarah, but not. It's hard to find the exact numbers anywhere. What proportion of health services is provided by traditional medicine in Africa? Anyone who knows Africa will guess towards the far end of it. Probably 80% of medicine is traditional medicine, of medical services. WHO's position on traditional medicine and allopathic medicine is to integrate the two. That is the official WHO policy, that there should be integration. With the integration of the two systems of medicine comes the question of how should knowledge be integrated, how to strengthen public health services by combining local and allopathic biomedical knowledge. So I think that's where I will pass the baton to Sarah to describe the research component of our paper.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. And thanks everybody on the panel. I'm very honoured to be here in this distinguished company. And a particular thanks to Albert, Maddie and Marijn for reorganising the panel in quite difficult circumstances. And I'm working at the Knowledge, Technology and Innovation Group at Wageningen University, and I'm sitting here in a cold Netherlands, just going to present the last bit of talking about the research that we've done. So what we used in the paper when we looked at the discourses around the gulf between local knowledge and global knowledge, we use the theoretical framework of social capital, and this is being applied in development, but also to knowledge creation, exchange in organisations, and work that I did in Bangladesh with colleagues. We applied it at the grassroots, and it still seemed to be applicable. And what we used the cognitive, relational, and structural aspects of social capital. So the the what, the who, and the how, if you like, aspects to look at the gulf between local and biomedical health systems based on the literature. I'm very much seeing social capital as an endogenous resource, and endogenous knowledge is something that's come up here quite frequently already. I won't go into this in more detail, but just to say that this focuses on critical discourse analysis, focuses on semiotics, so words and gestures. And the analysis we did is based on the work of Fairclough. And I think it's particularly relevant to the area of local and biomedical knowledge, because you can easily identify which are the dominant discourses, which is obviously in this case biomedical knowledge. And it's also, you can also, based on this analysis, you can use new discourses to contest the social order, to say that, you know, not only is the marginalization of local knowledge a representation of epistemic injustice, but also epistemic diversity is also really, really important, because the greater the epistemic diversity, the better knowledge we have to solve many problems. So the findings were really that in terms of the what, the cognitive aspects, there you see the difference between the two systems. They're really different knowledge systems, but also what seemed to be dominant was the structural problems, the differences in the legislative framework and the education system, for example, and relational aspects. There was a huge amount of distrust between the local and biomedical practitioners. And for example, one paper by Christine Higgins, she tried to organize in Tanzania a discussion between biomedical doctors and indigenous healers, and you could really see almost it was impossible for them to communicate effectively because you know, even sort of lack of recognition and lack of respect of traditional healers really limited the potential for discussion, despite all good intentions. Our research focused on a limited number of questions, and there was a strong focus on HIV, malaria, primary healthcare, a number of other areas. And so just quickly going on to the resources, because I think we're running over time. We identified cognitive, structural, and relational disconnects between the two knowledge systems. And I think the theoretical framework was quite useful, because we could really see that the structural disconnects were made it very difficult to link the two systems. And I think this also shows the importance, of taking a systemic approach to this problem, and the importance of, niches and tilting of systems, and that this is very much a wicked problem that's difficult to solve and socially embedded. And we used the methodology in terms of, we used a critical discourse analysis. And I think this was helpful, because we originally were going to do a systematic literature review, but the approach we used was good, I think, because it doesn't aim to be systematic or comprehensive. It just aims to identify the distant discourses, and also it focuses on action, on developing new discourses, which can counteract the dominant discourse, which is around the value of biomedical knowledge. So just to finally finish, I'd like to make one point. Although we didn't use the decolonization framework to look at the gulf between local and biomedical knowledge, I certainly, personally in my work, I really recognize what Professor Olantobi was saying right at the beginning about the importance of decolonization, and that approach, and the approach of, the perspective of coloniality, that entrenched power dynamics and patterns of knowledge creation have emerged from accidental historical power relations of colonial domination. And this problem that we're talking about, these disconnects, I think are rooted in that. So I would always say that this is, you know, from the perspective of this research, I would definitely say that this is very much a valuable lens to be looking at, even at current day knowledge creation and exchange and knowledge systems. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will be just marching on. So I think Sola Ojo is ready right now.
Yes.
To give his presentation. So I say we all focus on him. So you have the floor now, sir.
Good evening once again.
Yes. Could I help? Okay. Yeah. No. We see your screen. We see your screen right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Now, let me start by saying that due to the influence of colonial language in Africa, there has been a receding of knowledge of indigenous language forms. And one of the developments is the creation of variants of traditional proverbs. This paper is old in the selected Yoruba movies towards the emergence of variants of the traditional proverbs. Then the argument for and against the continued employment of the variants and their integration within former institutions. Now, we talk of proverbs, the traditional proverbs, also known as proto-proverbials, and the indigenous knowledge. Now, there are many definitions of proverbs in literature, and one cannot give one that presents a comprehensive explanation. But as Oloruntoba Oju 2014 submits, proverbs are the most distinctive signifier of African cultural expression and proud cultural heritage of Africans. Now, different times have been associated with proverbs and the new forms. We have the proto-proverbials. We also have that of sorry, please. We also have that of traditional proverbs, and then we have the post-proverbials. Now, we want to look at Oloruntoba Oju's classification of new forms of proverbs as our theoretical framework, and in an attempt to explicate a universal phenomenon in terms of indigenous knowledge. Oloruntoba Oju 1997 used indigenous naming to explain the new forms. The first one in Yoruba is Idakejede, which is counter-proverbial. This it has to do with presenting an alternative philosophical meaning to the proto-proverbial, or the way he puts it, an antithetical pair. Now we have two pairing. The second one will contradict the other one. Then we also have what I call sorry, please. Now, the meta-proverbial is the second one. In this regard, we have two proto-proverbials, two traditional proverbs that have the same meaning. Now, in its submission, the submission of Oloruntoba Oju, its purpose is solely to query the philosophical orientation of the first proverb, which is the proto-proverbial, but also to supply a contemporary and situationally relevant context, where such a context appears not to be well served by the philosophical profile of the original proverb. Then the third one is what it terms as alphanside, that is the pseudo proverbia. This what most scholars that look at post proverbials, new proverbs that they have been calling post proverbials. According to him, this includes the proverbials which vary the proto proverbia in a manner that is banal, literal, and often aesthetically uninspiring. Now, this is where we have people playing on the words, on the philosophical import of the original or the traditional proverbs. Now, there are reasons for this variation, the variation of the new forms, and various reasons have been given. We have most times they are intentional as a result of receding knowledge. We have people that don't have adequate competence in the traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge. So because of that, they supply their own meanings. Then they Ojo use the term pseudo-proverbia. We have Raji Oyela in 1997 that used the term post-proverbials, and we have that of anti-proverbs by mid-1990s. Now, other terms that have been used for these new forms are alterations, mutations, parodies, transformations, variation, wisecracks, and the like. Now, and some of the reasons that have been given for the variations of this proto-proverbials or the new forms are because people don't have competence in the proto-proverbia, in the original proverb, so they supply their own. We have that of creative, stylistic, and rhetorical competence, creative competence, proto-proverbial awareness competence. So in some instances, if you are playing with words and you want to give an alternative, that means you have to be competent in the original proverb. We have mechanisms of variations. Along with about 1970 listed pre-processes under meta-proverbia. They are general contextual fixation, specific contextual substitution, and rhetorical expansion. Then Litovkina 2014 stated the following as the mechanism of variations. Instances whereby one replaces a single word, substituting two or more words, changing the second part of the proverbs, and adding a tail to the original text. Then, resistance in the Nigerian academy. New proverbial forms have not been regarded as formal or standard forms. And then in the Yoruba language textbooks, for secondary school students, we have what we call Owe Igbalode, modern proverbs. And when in the Nigerian scholars, when they write and they describe these new forms, the terms such as banner, disruption, blasphemy have been used. And the new forms of proverbs are being promoted in the Nollywood. Nollywood is the name given to Nigeria film industry. And in our study here, we have two actors that we are looking at. Tunde Kelani is a Nigerian filmmaker and storyteller, while we have Babatunde Omidina, a Nigerian actor and a comedian. Two of them, they are very prominent in Nollywood. While Tunde Kelani promotes the proto-proverbials through its adaptation of classical literary materials, Babatunde Omidina, as a comedian, also known as Babatunde, plays with proto-proverbials to create new forms. He perfects the philosophical import of the proto-proverbials. Then
you have 3-4 minutes.
All right, sir.
Okay.
Now, some of the examples that we have from the data, I have talked about counter proverbial the other time. Looking at the first one, the pot that we eat pepper, its bottom must be scotched. Then on the one that give a contrary view of that is a patient's eye sees the nose. Why the first one is talking about hard working, being hardworking. The other one is talking about having patience. Sorry. Then the pseudo proverbia. Looking at this, a kind of this is what we call that of Banner, perfecting the original proverb. The king's house that God wants makes the house to be more beautiful. On the other way around, what we have here is the king's house that God wants will put the public in debt. That means people have to, the people in government need to use the public money to beautify the king's house. Now, I have to say that the use of proverbs has to conform with the contemporary language use and its adaptation. That means not all the new forms can be regarded as pseudo-proverbials, or that should not be accommodated in the formal setting in the Nigerian institution. So some of them we have to work so that some of them need to be integrated into the formal setting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Marijn, your mic is off.
Okay, this is just evolution hasn't reached me yet in order to understand it. Thank you. I was saying that Albert Oikelome is not here. If I'm correct, if he is here, he should make himself heard right now. But I assume he is not here. And in that case, I would say that we go to the talk of Pinochet. If I'm saying it right, Skiripa. I hope I'm doing your...
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Better than the Italians too, huh?
Yeah. So we still see... can you stop sharing, Oluwasola? I see a comment in the chat from Tom Dietz about Nollywood. Nollywood shows the power of reimagination and the invention of tradition. The Indian and Chinese movie industry did that earlier and helped to connect traditions with the modern era. We see the same process in Africa. I think it's nice to come back to Nollywood later in our talk. So I intend to do that, but I think we'll now go to medicine again, biomedicine again, and to Skiripa. I just said it right. So can you start showing your screen, Pino?
Okay, I hope, because I'm not so good with this kind of technology.
If you want me to do it, I can also try to do it. But if
okay, I'll try.
Yeah, we see now that you're...
I don't know. I want to... Now, do you see?
No, we don't, I think. No. Or maybe we do, but then you have to pull it up. We now see a P.
Did you see it now?
I don't think so.
Oh my God. Screen. Okay.
I can also put it.
Just a moment.
If not, I can put it up for you.
Maybe it's better. Maybe it's better because
okay.
Any time for me it's a problem. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah. So let me share my screen then, and you talk over it.
Okay.
So people have to go to my screen then. And I will just adjust as you go along. So if everything is all right, people see my screen now. Is that the case?
Yes, but I don't see my presentation.
No, but now you see.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go back to medicine, as you said, and to Alma Ata. Let me say that this is a reflection that starts from Alma Ata to go to some problems we have with integration of medicines. And I would like to focus on the problems, because I think that it is important to reflect on what was wrong in the processes we had during the 80s and the 90s. Let me say a thing that I didn't put in the PowerPoint, but anyways, I think it is important. Then maybe we cannot forget the larger political context, that to say that we still go talking, as is right to do, about primary health care, but since the 90s, the new liberal politics prefer the vertical intervention, which is the opposite of any primary health care, by focusing on 3 or 4 problems. And maybe when we must reflect on this, because this is a political issue very important for us, also in terms of integration. But let me go now to my PowerPoint. I try to summarize it very quickly. And since when Ghana achieved the independence in 1957, there was an interest in traditional medicine that resulted in the creation by Kwame Nkrumah, the first president, of the Ghana Psychic and Traditional Healers Association, which is the oldest healers association in the country. And this kind of interest in the traditional medicine went on through the years, sometimes with more interest, sometimes with less, but it was quite present. And why? I think we can go to the second slide if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are also there is not only an interest in the tradition, but also a political motivation, which is the creation of a national consciousness. We must remember that Ghana is a colonial legacy as country. And the northern part of the country, the southern part of the country had very different stories. Why I want to say? Because by this, we have an idea of traditional medicine, which try to be like a melting pot, I want to say, between different traditions. So it's something that was created, established by this process. So it's not it's not a traditional medicine which is rooted in a specific history of a group. And maybe we have also to reflect about this. It's sometimes how traditional medicine has been invented by some political processes. So, and the idea in any case was, as I told before, to create a national consciousness. No, you can go to the third. To create a national consciousness, which was also a way to say we are African, and in being African, we are different from the Europeans, also in the sickness health processes. Of course, the idea was to look at what China has done about traditional medicine during the 50s and the 60s. Now, I would like, as I told before, I would like to reflect on two things. The first is what remains of the integration project. There is a project very important which was established in Techiman, which is in Brong-Ahafo region, central Ghana, that very important, very famous, led by Warren. And the idea was to try to allow traditional healers to work with biomedical personnel, professionals. But the idea was to also to taught the healers with some basic concepts about hygiene and so on, diarrhea, convulsions, measles, in terms to give them tools and instruments to deal with this. So I want to say that in any case, there is something that is not exactly an idea of the parallel integration. That anyway, biomedicine was still considered as something that can be introduced to another system, but not the contrary. But what is important, few years later, the end of the project, you can go to the fourth slide, a Dutch anthropologist, Peter Ventevogel, went to Techiman and he did a sort of restudies, I can say. And the title of the book he wrote is very interesting, White Man's Things. Why this title? Because the healers he interviewed didn't keep the concept they were taught, but they told, and in addition, they told about the things that were done during the project as white man's things. So something that emphasizing the cultural distance, if not the incompatibility between the two traditions. And as I told before, the problem is maybe that there was not a real exchange. The biomedical professionals didn't acquire any information about traditional practice. So the only horizon which was thought to be contaminated, I can say, was the traditional one. And maybe that was a problem. Maybe the other is that when we think to this project, sometimes I think there is what Olivier de Sardin called the development populism. So some idea about what we are going to do and why, which is something that we must take into consideration. But if this is the first part I want to stress, so the idea how we go with the project, there is a second part which is important. I remember that about 20 years ago, Jacques van der Geest wrote a very interesting article about Alma-Ata, where he said that it's true that we have a lot of problems in integrating the different medicines, but maybe we should look at what he called integration from below. What does it mean? That if we look at the actual behavior of the people, we see through the health seeking behaviors how they use different approaches in different kind of medicine at once or one by one in order to solve their health problems. So there is a sort of integration made by the people, which can be very interesting to study for us. And starting from this, I would like just to show you to reflect on two things that comes from my research in Ghana. The first is about traditional pharmaceuticals. I use the word pharmaceuticals in a provocatory way. Why? I don't want to call them medicine for the reason I'm going to explain. That, as you can see, they are packed as modern medicine. And I couldn't find, sorry, sometimes I'm not so good in keeping things, the other pictures I have, where, for instance, we have the traditional medicine processed as pills and put into blister. So they look as the Western pharmaceuticals, and they are produced as in a semi-industrial manner in small factories. And this is interesting because they are not only because they are not anymore handcrafted, but because the idea they want to drive is that traditional medicine is not so far from the Western one, that they can do the same things. They can, as the Western pharmaceuticals, they can go to the market. And this is, please, the new one, the other slide. This is interesting because there is what we can call a process of branding of traditional medicine. And the process of branding is evident in the blister, for instance, but also in the packaging, where there is a very interesting rhetorical game between the image of Africa in the pack or the traditional healer dancing, but in a new form, because they are driving a Western look product. And I think that this is a way also to vehiculate new values and new ideas about what traditional medicine is. But I don't know how long I can talk more.
I would say a maximum 5 minutes.
Oh, so okay. I thought less. So I was going very fast. Okay, and I think this is interesting because we can say that there is also, if we look at this we can see how this branding process drives some, as I said, some cultural values very interesting about what traditional medicine is, but also it allows traditional medicine to become a cultural commodity. I remember a book of, I didn't put it in the slide, so I say now, of John and Jean Komarov, ethnicity.com, which is very interesting about this. So the commodity use of ethnicity, which is a process we cannot forget. Why I think so? Because in any case, we cannot think about traditional medicine if we don't put it in relation with a larger context. Now, let me go to the last example from my research, is what's happened sometimes when we use pharmaceuticals and when we go to see what I call the semantic translations. I take the case of cocoa. What is cocoa? Cocoa is a traditional nosographic category, which refers to a small thing. They call them ekeba, which means, translating from tree, the language of the Ashanti, insect, but it means a small living thing, which normally is in the blood of every human being. and goes through the blood. But what's happened that sometimes it can grow up. It is natural. So there is nothing related to the spiritual world, as quite often happen with other kind of sicknesses. But this is interesting because when this small thing grow up, it doesn't allow the blood to go, and then this blood forms like a boil. And if it happens in the brain, you become mad. If it happens to the ear, you become deaf. In the eye, you become blind. But what is normal is that it comes to the anus, like hemorrhoids. And what is interesting that if you take the most known, but also others, dictionary to English, you see that coco is translated as hemorrhoids, but this is not true. It's not only hemorrhoids, it's also other things. And I forgot to quote the most important things for my discourse. If it comes to the waist, to the to the sexual part, you become impotent or develop something they call sexual weakness. Now, what I met once in a market, in the market you have any kind, at least in Ghana, but also in Ethiopia, the two countries I better know, you can find everything. And you can find traditional medicine, but also vendors of at the black market of Western pharmaceuticals. And once I met one of these vendors who was selling a Western pharmaceutical for hemorrhoids, but it was not sold to cure hemorrhoids, but to cure impotency. This is very interesting. Why? I think because it's what we can call a double reduction. What I mean, the complex universe of the traditional medicine, where cocoa is something very complex that cannot be reduced to hemorrhoids, has been reduced to hemorrhoids by the Western knowledge, by the Western world anyway. But once it has done, it has came to the field as a new category. But it was received by Ghanaian in a different way. So they had, in this case, in a double game, they took hemorrhoids as the equivalent of cocoa in the tradition. So anything can cure hemorrhoids, can be used for the larger spectrum of cocoa problem. From this point of view, I think this is interesting because this kind of misunderstanding are very normal, but they come from an epistemological problem, which is related to how we want to translate the traditional medicine and how we deal with it. I finished my presentation.
Thank you very much. And I think now we go to
and thank you
our
for
final
helping
presenter,
me with
which we already have met. And I will
thank
close
you
for
helping me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Albert Roca, can you start your presentation?
Yeah, I'm going to share the presentation as the other one is a simple one. Just to follow the discourse. Okay, this is the title. GESA is my research group that is working about health and knowledge in Africa for a time now. Well, as we have just 10 minutes, I have reduced my intervention to a reflection. The reflection is about what COVID scenario has bring us about local knowledge, as Chris has announced before. I think as him, I think or as they, I think there is a clear change in the discourse. Of course, not in facts. We don't know in facts of the reaction before health local knowledge after COVID-19. And I try to explain it and see what we can learn about this. What I call not only me, but again, what I call the health imperative. So it means that in Spain we have some different proverbs also that speak about this health imperative. For example, they say that there are three things important in life. So there are health, money, and love. I think many languages have similar proverbs, but the order is very important. So what that means that health imperative, it means that first is health, or we don't play with health, has had a very important influence in the rejection of local knowledge in what we call health science. And we go to this because it's very easy to communicate distrust about other systems. Then this is a very important health imperative. With COVID, health imperative has been so important that it has changed very quickly some of our basic laws of living together. And this is we didn't think that this was coming so quickly, because this was something of the past. Well, then this is one question, but then opposing this health imperative, so that means in practice that scientific vision of health is very prevailing. Then we have politics and strategies of integration, as you have commented, from Alma-Ata, and then the first strategy in 2002, and then the Beijing Declaration, and then the nowadays strategy. So in the strategy, the main norm production in health in the world is enforcing the need to integrate local knowledge in health, the national health systems. That means community health, and especially traditional, what they call complementary and traditional medicine. But in the fact, in 220, they have made a balance, and this balance shows that many African governments have reacted to this situation. Even some of them had, as you have said, quite a long, like Ghana, quite a long tradition in studying or in just considering traditional medicine. But in practice, traditional medicine is very seldom, is very scarcely important in national health systems. There is no budget for it, and there's not too much. Then, what happens with African COVID scenario? Well, COVID, as many of us, I said at the beginning of the explosion. No? I wrote myself. I wrote an article on April. Has had finally a very low epidemiological impact in Africa and south of Sahara, but we have this exception of South Africa. We can speak about it if you want after, but in general, the impact is really low, and especially if you compare with other health problems. But then the measures that has been taken following the international recommendations has had a big impact, and a big impact that can be dangerous. I think that in Senegal, for example, schools have been closed during 6 months. Nothing similar has happened in Spain with numbers very high, much higher than in Senegal. Nothing comparable. So I have proposed to study in different places, and I'm doing this with different teams, but I can't here show what we are collecting bit by bit, but just some ideas. Anyway, so something we know, and I think very easily we can agree with that, is that the measures proposed by WHO and international agencies were not convenient for Africa and has been the main cause of the distress caused by the pandemic. Then, the very negative effects of confinement, because this was the most used model, have been compensated especially and mainly by what we can say local knowledge, because community solidarity and health resources, local health resources function in this is what before Sarah she was linking social capital and traditional health. And this link, everybody is recognizing that this link is important. That's why local knowledge is now a bit in the mood, is a bit on the focus. No? And then the third thing we know is that African governments are claiming for once that they have done a good job in health. Something that usually they have never the opportunity to do. So they ask to be trusted in which measures and which type of support they need. And they are asking, if you listen to them, basic support for basic research, for basic assistance, for basic care. That's what they are asking, but maybe it's not what they are going to receive. That's we know, but WHO and other agencies continue to press for application of global African countries. And the main clearest in this moment, because it's the main strategy in this moment, is what has been called PAM vaccination scheme. And I wanted to speak about this. And then, nobody in international agencies are caring really about endogenous explanation. Everybody knows that people have survived because things that we are not looking to. But nobody seems to think that it should be important to research on this. And research on this would be to research on health and local knowledge. And less than this, nobody is going to support laterally these systems. So then we have another question that we can see inside, is that there are no signs of international structural investment on national health systems in Africa. But what we can see is there is a growing outcry, a growing clamor requesting vaccination. And I speak about even colleagues and African friends. Not all of them are asking to be vaccinated, but this is growing. And this is what international health system is saying that they should do. So that is the main horizon now is a campaign medicine, a well-known type of medicine in Africa, and a type that denies confidence on national health systems, because campaign come always from outside, they begin and they finish. So there is a paradox. The actions we are taking, or international community are taking, I put myself inside, reject our knowledge. And this deserves a reflection, because it's very important. It's very clear that we are rejecting knowledge. So there is some kind of global ignorance that is putting forward. So I put a question just to test this question. The question I recognize is a bit provocative. I couldn't avoid it. What is my question? A bit literally. May we understand COVID-19 pump vaccination as a ghost hunting Africa south of Sahara? Why I say ghost? It's literally ghost because it may be one of the main menace for African health. Now I'm going to explain it. And ghost because it doesn't seem feasible. Those two meanings are very used in Spanish. I'm sure that not so used in English, but in Spanish, yes. And see that in Spanish, ghost, that is called fantasma, that rhymes with miasma. That is the ancient term for no material contagious agent. So something that has been considered by scientific as superstition, a word that anthropologists don't use. But then they are using some kind of nearly superstition when looking at Africa, and which is the situation is a trap. It can be defined as a trap. The numbers in Africa barely may justify not even a partial campaign. What I mean, the usual campaign of influenza that is done each winter, for example, in Spain, all temperate zones. With the numbers we have in Africa, for example, in Madagascar, you can see the numbers. You can go to any statistic show, and you can even comment with if these numbers are undervalued. You can look at this, and you'll see that the numbers are not enough to put forward not a vaccination, just a vaccination campaign. Then, if some assignment to Africa is high, if African states receive a high number of doses, it's sure that this will have some effect, an allowing effect, in the health cooperation in following years. Even if when they say that this is gratuitous, it is free, it has never been like that. So what you are going to pay in another way. That's very clear, and we can discuss that if you want. But it's so. And then you have, and the final element of the trap is that if you reject the vaccination campaign, you would be considered as a continent or as a country as a danger for world health security. Because the idea is everybody should be vaccinated. Something that we haven't done not once. So this will threaten any other relation of Africa with the world. So the story, why the trap may go? It may go because of fear. And we can deep in this, because fear is communicated by not only by media. Fear is also communicated by science. Fear is communicated by global expertise. Fear of being ridiculous. Fear of the health, really. Fear of the illness. But why the trap may not go? First, because very probably there will be no budget for Africa in the next months, or maybe even in the next year. The other day there was some news, just even you say humorous, to laugh, that they say that 25 persons have been vaccinated south of Sahara. I suppose it's not true, but the number is just to laugh. But I hope that there will be another cause of why the trap may not go. And this one may be the diffusion of critical approaches coming of sound scientific studies that recognize what we know really about scientific knowledge in Africa and about the uses of local knowledge. And that what should us do? Just put forward this last possibility. We can afford dispense with our knowledge. And I said in the most broadest way you can understand it. Maybe there is no direct answer now, but many trials we can follow, and it's not only research, it's research and doing. I mean, I have spoken about participation. There are many ways of participation. So through participation, we can explain what we know and try to put them. Then we have empirical orientation, not theoretical orientation, as I have told. That may help us. And then sharing framework, as everybody has told. We have to share this, and to share not only with peers, not only with other scientific STEM. Very quickly, and we can speak about them now in after the panel. Some proposals. Okay, I want to open a blog, for example, about this question of the vaccine ghost, because I think it's clear nobody is not too many people are speaking about this, because you fear of making a mistake at the sensible area of health. But the problem is that the fear of making a mistake shouldn't avoid the discussion when the discussion is sound, when the discussion is probable. Then I have prepared a student room project that I want to put in contact with students in Africa who are the main, in this moment, the main hope for fieldwork in next months. And then we are creating a working group in a new network of studies. This network, all of you are invited to this network, as we are working from South perspective, and we are sharing. And then another way is any of us has different experiences on focusing local knowledge. We can use them now. As Paul Richards was saying about people science on Ebola case, and that's an interesting thing. He said this at the beginning and nobody was listening to him. Maybe Ebola is not the exact pattern to understand COVID, but it's a good idea to compare. So this is some samples, but now it's your turn, now this turn of speaking, and thank you for having just listened this discussion. This just I was reflecting with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert. I think now we have heard all the speakers that were available. Are there in the public already questions arising? And maybe I can start the conversation by maybe trying to add on what you were just saying. I think it's also in the context of the COVID pandemic, maybe there is something to say for the need of integration of local and, let's say, for a lack of a better word, scientific knowledge. Of course, we're not. We don't. You know what I mean with those terms, but it's not in a position of. It's on an equal footing. But what is the need for the entire world for local knowledge in facing let's say the challenges of the 21st century? Because I think the COVID pandemic has shown us that we are all related, and that it has also something to do with our knowledge system that brings us to the position where we're in. So I invite any of the panelists to reflect on that. Is there somebody I can give the word? Please just speak up if any of the panelists has something to say about this.
Can I come in?
Yes, sure. But maybe it's good that I think also Albert. So I will let you speak too. But I will first give the word to Albert.
Okay. I think that the message of WHO, that it has many defects, but many of the WHO's defects are created by the restrictions that all the world states put on WHO. WHO is not the World Health Ministry is just a consulting, very big, but just a consulting institution. It can enforce things, but the reasoning of WHO is quite clear. What they say is that we can. They don't say that in this world, but you have to read them, and it's very easy to understand. We can, in this moment, and maybe during much decades, we can afford not taking into account local knowledge in health, because we don't have the means to grant any other alternative. So this is not an argument, this is a reality. Not seeing this reality is quite full. And this should explain that we maybe have problems to speak the same language. This is we organize also some workshop between traditional healers and doctors in Gambia, and they were all very excited, but all very worried that we saw this. Really very worried because they don't, even if they are from the same cultural milieu, cultural environment, their position during years has been different, and their attitudes and their recognition in society has been different. So it was very difficult for them. So we just allowed them not to exchange in a dialogue with the same concepts, but just to listen to the other and to be with the other, just to juxtapose, but juxtapose in the same scenario and with the same problem, with the same type of patient. And that was a first moment. I think we should move in this way. So integrate maybe a very polysemical word. It's for example, if we have time after, I would like to go back to Professor Taibo's intervention to ask a bit more about B-system, because it's very interesting how each one of us is trying to put different together, making things together.
I will go to Bertus Haverkort now, and then maybe Professor Olorontoba wants to respond.
Yeah, well, I want to respond to your question, Marijn, on what benefit does it have to focus on indigenous knowledge for the world? Well, I think it is very clear that the mainstream science is based on a worldview of anthropocentrism, to exploit nature. And the result is that we have developed a lot of technologies that helps us in exploiting nature, mining, destroying biodiversity, destroying climate, and so on. So in fact, that worldview has led to a complex system of science that is leading to this type of exploitation. There are other scientific streams from different cultures that are much more ecocentric, that are putting the ecology at the center, or put the community in the center, or put the whole holistic framework as the basic of the cosmology, and for the science and the technology to be derived from these worldviews. So I think it is a very basic, even important for the survival of this globe, that we deviate from this monolithical thinking in terms of exploitation, putting the humanity and mankind in the center of the world, of the attention and center of the technology development, and go for different worldviews to start with. And based on that, try to develop and improve, because I think also because of this marginalization of these other scientific traditions in the world, many of these have not developed, let's say, have not had a chance to develop a good and appropriate technology because they have been marginalized and been substituted by mainstream science. That it is a time to repair and to give more chances to other scientific traditions to develop technologies and develop science, and also train people to have the capacities to work on this in this line. So I think there is a lot of argument to give room to different scientific traditions and different role and place to traditional sciences.
Professor Olorontoba?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a dilemma, really, and I think I'm referring to the question about the global pandemic and African reaction now. I think, but I want to take it first of all from the point that Professor Haverkort just made, that the more acceptable path to global integration in these matters is for a helping hand for Africa to develop its own capacities. That is, for example, part of the problem that we seem to have is that Africans are very suspicious of motives because some of the projections are coming from entrepreneurs like Bill Gates and the big pharmaceuticals, and there is the problem of suspicion of whether the motive is actually altruistic or the motive is all about profit. That suspicion needs to be helped. Needs to be something needs to be done about it. Secondly, there's a problem of history. There's a problem of history that the world and the Africans are grappling with the fact that in the past, Africans had been used as guinea pigs for things like vaccines and had been earmarked for decimation and so on. So that history, I think, again, the way to help the problem of that history is for Africa to get a helping hand to develop its own capacities. So that will dispel suspicions and rumors and things like that. Finally, there's the issue of the lack of reciprocation. And some people have come up with a hypothesis or a possible scenario where, for example, the pandemic starts from Africa. Instead of the other way around. Suppose a pandemic starts from Africa. Will there be that kind of reciprocation? Westerners will be asked to go through the same thing, get vaccines or medicines or whatever from Africa and so on and so forth. So there's that problem of power asymmetry that is also dogging the process, and it's quite a complicated process. But I think what is needed is for the world to see a possible egalitarian picture and try to help Africa to develop its own capacities so that we can kind of operate at a similar level. Thank you.
I will now go to Sarah Cummings and then come back to the question you raised about Nollywood, Professor. So I will go to Sarah now and then come back to that matter because I think it's very interesting. Sarah.
Okay, thanks very much. I just want to add an extra point maybe, and that's really, if you look at the relationship between local knowledge, is very much contested. And for example, when Chris and I were originally writing this paper, we were trying to involve a colleague who's a medical doctor, and he was really saying, that local knowledge is problematic. And he did have some good examples. He was talking about snake bites, for example, that there are certain cures, some cures for snake bites work and other ones he was saying were that sometimes traditional medicine can slow down, consulting traditional practitioners can slow down access to hospital care and emergencies. And also he was talking about, that female genital mutilation is integrated into the health system. So I think when you're integrating the two systems, you need to have a governance system which is based really on local ownership and local realities, and that you need to make sure it's not an extractive relationship too. I mean, if you look a lot of the literature on ethnobotany, for example, you read about how the sort of Westerner went to a village and talked to lots of people and gathered different types of plants and knowledge, and then sort of just disappeared when actually the local community were wanting to improve their recognition and their use of medicinal plants. And so that's really my point. You need to make sure you have a new governance systems which aren't based on extraction. So thank you.
I think I see also Madi. Do you also want to respond to this matter?
Yeah, very, very quickly, and just from another perspective as well, from perspective of education, it is pedagogically sound that you build knowledge on prior knowledge. And a lot of the knowledge that is transferred at universities in South Africa, and I presume in the rest of Africa, is foreign to the students. And for that reason, for us, it's important that local knowledge is acknowledged in the curricula, that students can relate to that as well. That's a point that I want to make.
Yeah, and I also want to, I've mentioned it in the chat before, but I think an interesting book on this topic from a perspective of the history of science transforming into the history of knowledge is the book The Evolution of Knowledge by Jürgen Renn. I think you're also familiar with it, Madi. But I think that's just an interesting work to get your ideas from. I see Albert, but if you're right, there was a problem that a different question that Professor Oloruntoba wanted to ask based on a question from Ton Dietz. Or do you have a long response, Albert? Or can I go to a next subject? You're muted still.
Yes. I just wanted to comment the Sarah Cummings and after go very briefly, and after we can go to the Nollywood question.
Yeah.
I think I have felt the same. I think everybody who's working in health, at least from the anthropology coming from anthropology or social science, has experienced the same reaction of people, even people that are willing to collaborate with them, that came from the healthcare. But and one of the main arguments against what they call pseudoscience, that is a terrible word to explain what diversity of knowledge systems are, is the time, the problem of time, that other systems are going to make your reaction too long, and then when you arrive to the health system, it will be too late. This is a study that in European society is completely false. As a statistic, of course, it can be true of a person, but as a statistic, it doesn't. But then we don't know exactly in Africa because the studies are not so developed. But all my idea is that the main problem to access to biomedicine in Africa is not the competence or the concurrence of other local systems, not at all. Because African, as you know, in religion and in other places are plural. So they go to any place. The problem is that it's very difficult to go to a hospital, afford what a hospital or a consultory means, and then have a good assistance, a good care. And this is the problem. So not the other one. But people have fear of being put as responsible of saying, okay, you can go to the traditional doctor. And but fear is not a good orientation. It's just what I wanted to say.
I want to go back to the question or what Ton Dietz mentioned earlier about Nollywood and the power of reimagination. And I believe Professor Oloruntoba wanted to comment on that. So I want to give him the word.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to So that Nollywood, of course, is a Nigerian film industry, and today it's regarded as the second in the world after Bollywood, I think, in terms of the number of productions. It has come with modernization and transformations of the local situation, and it has also come with some kind of technological competence of its own that allows it to reproduce quite rapidly. Something that is envied, I think, by a number of film producing worlds. But it's also has created some transformations in the areas of gender and sexuality, because it has brought some questions that were muted, that were hidden to the fore in these areas. So Nollywood is created with all of that. But there's also the flip side, the issue of language that Lua Shola Ojo was trying to talk about. What quite a number of local folks regard as a bastardization or watering down of the language, and also the fact that Nollywood also exposes some of the effects, some of the deleterious effects of the dominance of colonial languages, which has meant that users are no longer as competent in their indigenous languages as they used to be, and are stepping down to lower and banal forms of representation, which many people are quite unhappy with. An example is what happens with proverbs and so on. The kind of banalization, which is not all due to aesthetic play and stuff like that, but simply due to ignorance of what the original versions used to be. And I think this is where I just want to intervene, that yes, there's a positive aspect, but there's a negative aspect as well, especially in the areas of language. Some would also talk about the areas of culture, morality, and so on and so forth. As far as I'm concerned, that's neither here nor there, but I am more concerned about the issue of language and the fact that the industry does tend to water down the indigenous languages.
Okay, for the sake of time, because we have 6 minutes left, I will give Professor Dietz the word, and then Professor Olorentoba for the final remarks, and maybe Professor Roca. But just to say a few things, I want again to give your attention to the beautiful documentary Everything Must Fall, tonight at 8 via the platform of Africa Knows, which I saw the film earlier, and it's really interesting also to everything we've been talking about today. The second is that some students from the minor African Dynamics have interviewed some of our panel members, and they've made a postcard about it. It's not yet on the website, but keep an eye on the website of Africa, of the Africa Studies Centers of Africa Knows. Mari.
Africa Knows.
Africa Knows. That there will become a podcast in which every one of the panelists, not everyone, but most of the panelists will delve deeper into the subject of their paper. And there was a third. What was there? Anything else? Oh yeah. If anyone who wants to stay connected and interested, please put your email in the chat, so we will have an inventory and we can send you more information. And there's a final comment from Sarah Cummings and Chris Zielinski. you have to remind me of the name of your journal, but most, if not all, of these papers will be published in the journal for the. Can you, Sarah? Can you help me? She will put it in the chat, I think. The Knowledge Management for Development Journal. So all the papers will be published. I guess open access also.
Yes.
So that's that. You have all the time to read it afterwards. I think this were all the final comments on a practical level from me. Then I now want to give the word back to Ton Dietz and then to the professors, the conveners, Albert Roca and Dr. Taiwo Olutoba Ojo for the final remarks, and then it's done.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much, all of you, to a very, very interesting panel. Let me say that the lack of recognition of indigenous knowledge or local knowledge has a lot to do with a lack of esteem, lack of respect, particularly in scientific circles and academic circles. So one of the big questions is how to improve or increase that esteem, that prestige. For that, you need role models. You need role models in the academia who try to connect the two and who give more prestige to examples of indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. But what very much helps is a thing like Nollywood. Because if a prestigious film industry that has become so influential to so many people succeeds of bringing things together, even if it means bastardization of language or bastardization of cultures, because that's what's happening. It's invention of tradition, and it has a little bit to do with the past, but it's not the past. It's something else which they do. Now, and there I think we can learn a lot from the experiences of the Indian film industry, the Chinese film industry, the Brazilian film industry, because in their soaps, for instance, they did exactly that. And they gave more prestige to things being local, things coming from the local community. And that, I think, helps. And if academics like us know how these processes work, probably you can really assist in building up that prestige.
For me, let me be the moderator and not bother you with my own very appreciative opinion. I will want to give the final word to Dr. Taiwo and Dr. Roca.
Okay, thank you very much. I think really all I wanted is to say thank you to everyone for making this a very interesting panel, to the organizers, to the conveners, the moderator, everybody, and those behind the scenes, to the technical people. We are very grateful to everyone for what they have done to make this work. And I also want to say that there's a lot that we have said. There's a lot of ground yet still to cover. I'm glad for the last message by Professor Dietz about trying to raise the esteem of local knowledge. It's been a problem all through. And I think there are a number of other problems that panelists have drawn attention to. One of those problems is the problem of definition, and it is my view that some of the definitions of local knowledge or indigenous knowledge have only contributed to inferiorizing these knowledges, especially because the definitions have continued to trap indigenous African knowledge in the past. In terms of spirituality, in terms of orality, in terms of rituals, and so on and so forth. And I think the message needs to come from the new definitions that we fashion, that it's not static. Indigenous knowledge in Africa is not static. It's not trapped in the 18th century, but it's dynamic and it's moving with the present times. I also want to say something to disabuse the minds of, I think, the world at large, that when people talk about the indigenous knowledge, they are not necessarily talking about primitivism or going back to some 3rd century or thereabouts. No, that's not what it is. But they are talking about using indigenous capabilities to develop technology and science, and wanting the world to also pull back or to put back in what they have taken from Africa, through funding that builds genuine capacities, and not just keep Africa on the tethering rope, or tethering Africa perpetually to Europe and the West. I also want to say the whole issue of branding that has been talked about regarding African medicine is a good point that I think we need to build upon. I think this point was made by Professor Schipper. Professor Dittmars talked about the fact that we have no choice but to decolonize for human survival. And I think that's a message that we need to carry forward from this presentation. We also need to pay attention to Sarah Cummings and Chris Zielinski's thoughts about disconnects in knowledge. I would want to see in their conclusions how this integration should really work. It's a question that they asked in the paper, and we want really to see how it's going to work. And there's one curious statement that I think it was Dr. Cummings that made about colonialism being, that it's possible for us to categorize colonialism as some kind of accident from which some kind of benevolence may have emerged. I think that's a troublesome thought. I think simply because to start with, it was no accident. It was no accident. It was a deliberate, calculated pillage and decimation of the continent. And I think, well, yes, we can say there are some things that we still have to work together towards the future. But I think the way we tag this cataclysmic incidents may also be problematic sometimes. And I think I want to draw attention to that. So I want to, on that note, once again, just thank everybody for everything. And I've not forgotten the cosmovision of Professor Miller and Havenkot. And I think we want to go along with that as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I see some things coming in the chat. Again, I want to invite everybody who wants to stay updated to put their email in the chat, and I will give the last word to Professor Roca.
Yes, we are out of time. In fact, we have been here for 3 hours, and for me it has been a short time. So I have really lots of things to talk about and to argue and to discuss in the good sense of the word, and not the less the Nollywood case that I think Dancing with the Devil as also a popular comic or explains it's an experience of a scholar life, as you know, and it's an experience that we can't deny. So, but you have to know what you are doing. But and then what I mean is that there are many things that have been taken into the table, put on the table, and I think we have time, because there is a learning of this Congress that I won't forget, and this that something that you are doing in 2 days, you can do it during 3 months in 21st century, and that's a very big learning, because usually all we were doing is to shorten time, and here we have expanded time, and that's the way of speaking and thinking about local knowledge. Exactly, I am really very happy about this. So I have to say thanks to the organizers. Thanks because of this big effort that I know is not the same as an effort organized 3 days, a 3 days event, than a 3 months event. It's not the same. But I think it's very rewarding. And then with this, I mean that I don't give this panel for finished. We have a publication, thanks to Chris and Sarah in the Horizon, but we have more than this on the Horizon. So I will propose you a meeting for the end of the month, just to reorganize and to put a calendar. I think now to organize a calendar is too complicated, but we can do it in a meeting in some 2 weeks' time or something like that. And also we will invite everybody who wants to participate, because I feel that this is the first of other collaborations, and I feel it strongly. So thank you to everybody, and just don't forget what we are thinking about, because we are going to meet again, and we are going to continue to exchange information, something that may be a science or not, and in fact, I think we are going to invite other people to the exchange, the people we are speaking about, and other people that I invite in this moment, from this moment. So thank you, and Marijn, I think we can. Just,
I think I'll give the reins to the technical people to close this session.
But Marijn, before they close, from our side, both to you and Albert as well, thank you very much. Thank you for arranging things behind the scene, and for you, Marijn, for being our moderator and facilitator and timekeeper and everything else, for getting it going.
It was a joy to do it. So, it was a very rewarding experience. So I'm happy that we, especially for the first part, we had so many people. But it was a very good, and let's keep in touch and keep the conversation going, because it's an important conversation.
And initially we decided with Sarah and Chris to stay afterwards and discuss the journal, but guys, my tongue is hanging on the floor. Maybe we can set up another meeting if you don't mind.
I think so.
We need a meeting for that, another meeting.
Yeah. To discuss the journal and publication. Yeah. Okay, Sarah, will you take the initiative and?
I think we're officially now, the bar is open. Yes. So anyone. So okay, I now announce the conference to be closed. But if you want to hang out, then you're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah.